We do relationships our own way, left always wanting more. We create our own identities, and we're constantly dissatisfied with what's there. We do success our own way, while living in constant fear of failure. We do everything our own way, so why does it all still feel purposeless, hopeless, not enough? But what if that's not the end of the script? What if there's more to the story? Instead of destruction, instead of ruin, instead of disaster. A new life, a new identity, a new creation.
Hey guys, Daniel Sanderson here. Last week was epic being at the corn maze, actually being able to get everyone together for the first time in like a really long time. When I was standing outside the corn maze during like the 2 games that we were playing, it was amazing being able just to hear the screams, the laughs, the jokes and all that. And I was just like looking into the sky, be like, man, like I really miss this. And if COVID-19 has taught me anything, it's that I really took certain things for granted. And then life now during COVID-19 is vastly different than what life was like before COVID-19. Like I forgot that like I was able to actually hug someone, that I could hang out with groups, that I could go to a different country, that I could sneeze without being worried about being like tackled and taken out. And most of all, being able to actually find a bathroom, like a public bathroom that's usable before I pee myself. Those are the things I realized that like I started to take for granted. So for you guys, if you put life before COVID and life during COVID beside each other, what do you think have been the biggest differences or the biggest changes? What do you think has affected you the most? And do you feel like that you've even changed during this season of life? Talk amongst yourselves about that. So talking about comparison, I don't know if any of you guys are like me, where if I want to understand something super clearly, I need to put one thing up against the other, like a compare and contrast like exercise, where I want to say, okay, if this is the right thing to do, or this is the right path or decision, I want to see it compared and put up beside something that's not the right decision or the right path or direction. And I want to see the clear difference of that, oh, okay, I understand now why this is the right thing to do. And so I wonder if any of you guys like to do the exact same thing. It's kind of like when I was a little bit younger and I'm like, okay, my hearing I think is great. I don't feel like there's any issues. I've never gotten my hearing tested. And then one of my friends was like, yo, like, get your ears flushed out at the clinic. It feels great and it's free. And I'm like, I'm a cheap guy. I like free things. I might as well try it. It doesn't hurt. And so I went to the clinic and they went and they flushed out one ear and I kind of like, is this what hearing is actually like? Is this real life? Because it was like night and day between my one ear that was flushed and the one ear that wasn't flushed. Like I was really only hearing at like 2/3 capacity before I got my ears flushed, but I would have never noticed unless I could actually experience what it was like currently compared to what it could be like. And this is kind of the same thing that goes on with our lives. Think about you're walking through all your daily routines, you're going about your life, and you're like, okay, this is just how it is. I look around, it doesn't look like anyone's living any different, and so this must be the good life. But we don't really actually know. But actually, in reality, we are walking through life with like a lot of insecurity, walking through life with fear, walking through life with different stress, different heartaches, feeling like alone, feeling like we can't really find a good friend group. Maybe we feel like worthless. Maybe we feel like we actually can't amount to anything. But then we look around at everyone else. We look around at the world and we see that, oh, it looks like everyone else is feeling and acting the exact same way. This must just be normal. But the reality is that there's something actually way more for us. This isn't what life should actually be like. You could actually live a life where you're not dealing with fear all the time, with anxiety all the time, feeling completely lonely all the time. But we wouldn't know unless we experience something different than what we're feeling right now. An example would be when I was like grade 4, I went through like a traumatic bullying experience that kind of like shaped the trajectory of like the next bunch of years of my life. And I went about everyday life thinking I wasn't worth a lot, that I should be fearful, that I should try and control every situation and every environment that I was in because I wasn't sure what people were going to do to me. I had to try and control how I acted, how I looked. I felt lonely. I felt scared. I felt anxious and worried. But I looked around at everyone around me and I was like, oh, other people are getting bullied too. Other people are insecure. Other people are also fearful. People are lying to each other. People are backstabbing each other. It's like, okay, I guess this is just what life is. And it sucked. But for me, I was like, well, I guess I just need to like step up, toughen up, and just work through it because that's what life is. And so I tried to like take things onto my own shoulders and try to fix things myself. And so I was like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to try and befriend the main bully group because maybe if I just do whatever they want me to do, I'll make everything stop. But when I tried to take things into my own hands, I never felt more afraid, more hurt, and actually alone and disgusted with myself than ever before. Like, it caused me to do things that I regret, like some pretty bad things, like cops got involved, and I saw like best friends getting beaten up, and I didn't do anything about it. And it totally took me on this totally different path than where I could be going. And so, for you guys, I don't know what it's like for you and what your normal routine is and how you're feeling right now, but I know when I tried to take everything on my own shoulders, I felt like my life was so screwed up. I was a disaster. So this leads me into the title of our new series, Don't Be a Disaster. And you're like, whoa, that seems like really heavy. But let's be real. Let's be honest here. When most of us look in the mirror, what we see is we see a disaster. We see someone that has everything in a mess. We look around at the world, we see brokenness, we see hate, we see pain and suffering. We notice our own screw-ups all the time. We are disappointed when things don't actually go the way we planned them to go. And we end up just giving up because no matter what we try and do to fix things ourselves, all it seems to do is just make things worse. And that's why in this series, we're actually going to dig deep to see why we actually feel like a mess, to look at the different like techniques and methods that we try to actually fix ourselves, and to actually try and understand why do we always try and focus on our own power and our own abilities, and ultimately see why it never works. And what the only thing that works is actually having faith in Jesus. And faith being, in the eyes of Paul, is attachment, union, and solidarity with Jesus, which ultimately just means being in love with Jesus, being in his presence, having that relationship with him. That's going to be the thing that changes your life, the thing that's actually going to show you that the way that you've been living is not reality. It shouldn't be the norm. It shouldn't be the thing that you feel like, oh, okay, I got to just cope with this. If you have faith in Jesus, if you actually have this kind of loving relationship with Jesus, you're going to see what true life can actually be. Because you don't restore your life, only Jesus can. But why do we never go to him? Why do we never run to him when things go wrong? The reason why I know that we default to relying on ourselves is because when we look at the world, what it tells us you can be your own God. You can give yourself your own happiness. You can be whoever you want to be. Do whatever you want. The only thing that's holding you back is you. And so when you screw up, who feels the weightiness of it? Who feels the heaviness? You do, because it's all on you. If you're not happy, it's because it's your fault. If you don't have peace, it's because it's your fault. And we see that we just end up hurting ourselves and taking on more pain and more weight, and we just get mad at ourselves. But that's what the world says will bring us happiness, is just you be your own God. Don't let anyone tell you what to do. That's the norm. But I know that it's not the norm, and is actually hurting us more and more and more, and creating us to be an even bigger disaster. And I have a bunch of statistics to kind of prove that to you guys. So let me list them out for you. So in Canada, by the age of 40, it says about 50% of people actually deal with mental illness. It says that 20% of all deaths among 15 to 24-year-olds is suicide. Suicide is the reason for 24% of all deaths amongst 15 to 24-year-olds. 1 in 5 Canadians indicate that they deal with extreme loneliness. We also spend 5.7 hours a day on our phones. We're wasting a lot of our life away. 1 million Canadians actually have eating disorders. So clearly, what's normal when we take everything on our own shoulders and we do everything that the world's telling us to do is actually leading us to eating disorders, to mental illness, to suicide, to loneliness. Like, you're lying if you say that that's what you want and you think that should be the norm. And if this doesn't tell you that we can't fix ourselves, I don't know what will. And that's why over this school year, we're actually going to look at how we are hurting ourselves when we're trying to fix things on our own. And what life can actually look like when we're willing to just let go and let Jesus transform us. That there's this way of living that we see as a norm right now, but then there's true reality of living with loving and being close with Jesus. And that's the kind of life that we should actually be aiming for. And that's in our grasp. That's tangible. We can actually have that. We don't have to just settle for this. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So this passage that you guys just read, Ephesians 2, verses 1 to 10, is all about comparing and contrasting. It's comparing and contrasting like with words like old life with new, dead to life, two ways of living, life in sin and life in Jesus. It's walking through two very different paths in life, almost like two different identities, two different ways that us as humanity can identify with, like an old way of living or a new way of living. And the whole point of this passage that Paul's trying to portray is pretty much to be like, hey people, get a life. Like, actually get a life. Like, don't continue in the old ways of living that you think is just normal. Wake up, because there's so much more. There's so much better for you. It's like Paul's trying to snap people into a reality that this passage is trying to explain of what life can really look like with Jesus. And the best way that Paul can do that is by showing what life is like with Jesus, and he also shows what life is like without Jesus. But the people that are reading this are kind of like, oh, we're just like zombies, kind of like walking through life being like, oh, it's no different. We shouldn't really change or anything like that. So Paul's trying to like knock this into their head and being like, hey, like there's so much more for you than just living kind of like in this identity with death. Are they going to identify with death, or are they going to identify with life? Because the key thing is everyone, if they know Jesus or not, has the same needs and has the same desires. But the thing is that there's two different approaches to how do you actually like achieve those or like scratch the itch for those needs or those desires. One of those approaches is absent of Jesus. The other approach is with Jesus. That's what Paul's trying to portray in this passage. The passage is contrasting those approaches, and there's no middle ground. There's either one camp or the other camp. There's no sitting on the fence. Kind of like there's these like two Christian guys that start directing some like horror movies, and people were like, why, as Christians, why are you doing this? Why are you directing these like horror movies? And they said, because we want people to open up their minds to understand there's like a spiritual realm. And at the end of the movie, they had like this big write-up explaining why they did this, being like, hey, there is a heaven, there is a hell, there is life, there is death. There's more than just what meets the eye in this world. And there's no sitting in the middle. You got to choose which side you're on. And that's what Paul is doing here, is like, hey, do you identify with this old way of living or this new way of living? Because honestly, we need to take sin way more seriously than we usually do. And this passage is trying to wake people up to that reality. Because sin takes good things that God has actually created for us, and it distorts it and removes Jesus from it, removes God from it. So if it's like relationships, if it's money, if it's authority, if it's recreation, if it's beauty, all those things are made by God and he loves them. But what happens is sin comes in and it pulls God out of it. And that's when it becomes hurtful and starts to make us more of a disaster. And we live in this weird space where the new age exists with Jesus because of what Jesus actually did here on earth, died on the cross, rose again, and now we've got the Spirit in us, and now there's the church and all that. So the new age exists. but while the old age is still with us and at work. So we're in this tension point where we experience both. And for people that know Jesus, we have found this new life. We've had tastes of life with loving and having faith in Jesus, but we always end up turning to death. It's kind of like you would laugh at someone if they had their phone and they're trying to charge it because it's completely dead. It's at 0%, and everyone knows that I'm the guy that always has his phone at 1% or dead. But you would laugh at that person if they tried to charge the phone by plugging it back into itself. Because you're like, that doesn't work. Well, it makes sense. A dead thing can't bring life to something. And that's the thing. We identify with death when it's without Jesus, when it's absent of Jesus. That way of living and that lifestyle cannot bring life. A dead thing cannot bring life. Only Jesus can actually bring life. And that's where we get to the key passage in verse 8 where it talks about, for by grace you have been saved through faith. It is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. But this is hard to grasp because we are told that you can do anything. Just work hard enough, do whatever you want. But we get more and more empty and unfulfilled. But this new life, it changes how you feel, it changes how you act, it changes how you see the world, and it all comes in one way, a gift. And that's all you need to do is to accept that gift is have faith. And remember, that faith is attachment, union, and solidarity with Christ. Just position yourself to be in the presence of Jesus and you'll fall in love with him. He's going to transform your life. And you're going to start seeing your life look like the second part of the passage in how Paul explains this is what life looks like with Jesus. And I would love to break this down for you guys more, but that would take away all the fun from your small group leader. So I've got a bunch of questions for you guys. I want you to hash through them. Have fun. Verse 8 to 10 is so beautiful. It sums up the gospel perfectly, that we need saving because we are dead. And we know this because we feel that something's wrong. We can see our sinful tendencies. We can see our screw-ups. We can see that there's cruelty and injustice in the world. We feel worthless. We feel like we don't have everything together. But it says that by grace through faith is how we're saved. It is all a gift. That's the gospel. The gospel is a gift. That God did the work through Jesus to save us, that we did nothing, that we don't deserve it. We haven't done anything. We currently aren't doing anything to save us, and we won't be able to do anything to save us. It is all on Jesus, and he's done that for us. It's all a gift. God steps in and he does the work. We don't have to take things on our own shoulders. But we have a hard time grasping this. And I know that because when I would go to my Oma and Opa's house, we would just show up and they would just give us money, my brother and I. And we'd be like, no, this is not fair. We don't deserve this. We haven't done anything. We try and hide it or give it back to them somehow, and they get really mad at us. But we don't get it. We don't deserve this money. And they're like, no, you showed up. That's the same thing with Jesus. He's done everything, and all he asks of us is to just show up, just to build that relationship with him, to have faith, that attachment, union, and solidarity with him, that love, just to show up and say, hey, I believe that you are my Lord and Savior, that you love me and you've shown me that. That's all we're asked to do. It's a gift because God loves us like that. And we aren't saved because of our own doing. We can't boast. But through what Jesus has done for us, it should drive us to want to do something. Not because we feel like we need to earn it or save ourselves, but because of that love that we're experiencing from Jesus. It should drive us to want to live a life that's glorifying to him, to read our Bibles, to understand what he's calling us to do, to take action. And that could look super different for all of you guys, depending on your scenario, your environments, what your giftings are and all that. But we have to stop looking at this whole salvation, what Jesus has done for us, is just like a transaction just to get into heaven. There's one line that always sticks out to me is that we can't love the gifts that Jesus brings more than Jesus himself. That we can't just love community or peace or being saved or going to heaven or whatever more than actually just loving Jesus himself, and that's the goal. And if we do that, we'll start to see ourselves in the camp of life, identifying with life, and we'll have a whole new normal. So the big question for you guys now is, drum roll, is that now you put old life, identifying with death, and new life with Jesus, you put them side by side. Which camp are you living in? Like, be honest, be truthful. And you can tell by the fruit of your life what you see around you, how you feel, and the impact you're making. You'll be able to see that. And that will tell you quite clearly which camp you're in. So talk about that in your small groups. Which camp are you truly in? Where do you see your life going? And what is the norm for you? Talk about that in your groups. I have other questions for you guys. I love you though. I'm excited for this year. I hope you have a great rest of your week. I know that today has been heavy, but I think it's so necessary to set us up for an amazing year walking through this series. Don't be a disaster.